Hello everyone and thanks for tuning in. On today's newsflash topic, we will be discussing the beginning of Biden's long goodbye. In a speech from the Oval Office, President Biden said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation. But he said nothing about his own age or capacity that led so many Democrats to desert him. He always knew that he would be delivering a speech like this. He just thought or hoped that it would be more than 4 years from now. Yet, while it was not technically a farewell address with 6 months still to go in office and more presidenting to do, it was the beginning of Joe Biden's long goodbye. Mr. Biden's address to the nation from the Oval Office on Wednesday night was all Joe love him or hate him. The paeans to American exceptionalism, the invocations of the family, the selective boasting about his record, the favorite lofty phrases about an inflection point and savoring our democracy, and yes, the soft, raspy old man's voice that no longer commands the room the way it once did. There was not much of introspection about how he had gotten to this point of indignity. He may be focused on the soul of America, but he revealed little of his own. Indeed, if there has been much soul searching over these past days and weeks of personal and political trauma that led to this reluctant end of his storied half-century political career, the search has been called off, or at least the results were not reported. He said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation, but said nothing about his own age, health, or capacity that led so many Democrats to desert him since the calamitous debate on June 27th. He did not describe the journey from supreme confidence that he and he alone could beat former President Donald J. Trump to the conclusion that in fact he could not. He offered no elaboration on how he had finally decided to give up his bid for a second term. But at the same time, he held back any bitterness he may have felt. Instead, it was an opportunity for a reset, to tell his story again on his own terms and recast the narrative as he starts to exit the stage. In his first extended public comment since dropping out, he tried to remind voters who had grown weary or worried of him why most of them had liked him in the first place, and maybe, just maybe, to begin to shape his place in history. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years, he said, with pictures of his family visible behind him. Nowhere on earth could a kid with a stutter from modest beginning from Pennsylvania and Delaware one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as the President of the United States, but here I am. The desk, of course, is still his until January 20th. And he made clear that he has an agenda to press in these months to come, especially consolidating the gains he has had at home and trying to bring a degree of peace back to the Middle East. He is not done, he said. He has a to-do list that includes growing the economy, stopping Russia from swallowing up its neighbors, and overhauling the Supreme Court. But as attention now turns to Vice President Kamala Harris, and his influences invariably begins fading by the day, Mr. Biden also wanted to take credit for what he sees as an accomplishment. He recalled taking over a country gripped by the worst pandemic in the century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War, and leading it toward better times. Gliding over the setbacks, he boasted of creating the strongest economy in the world, noting that wages are going up and inflation is coming down, that the manufacturing sector is expanding and the racial wealth gap is shrinking. We are literally rebuilding our entire nation, he said. He talked of appointing the first Black woman to the Supreme Court, fighting climate change, lowering the cost of prescription drugs for seniors, and providing health care to more Americans and trying to reduce gun violence. And contrary to the dystopian portrait offered at last week's Republican National Convention, he noted that violent crime was near a 50-year low and that border crossings after the surge of early in his presidency had fallen to the lowest level since he took office. It is a record he wanted to take to the electorate and thought he could win on. But as much as he likes to say that he should be judged on what he has already done, what he came to discover in the last month was that he was being judged on what he might or might not be able to do in the future. Even as Republicans call on him to go the next step by resigning the presidency outright, the White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said hours before the speech that the first octogenarian president still believed he could do the job, not just for the next 6 months, but even 4 more years. Yet in his speech, he implicitly conceded that most Americans did not agree. In recent weeks, it has become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor, he said. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my visions for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So a story of weakness, of being forced out of the race by his own friends, becomes in this telling a story of truth, of sacrifice for a greater good. In that sense, without saying it quite so explicitly, he contrasted the integrity of his concession with what he sees as the lack of integrity of Mr. Trump, the man he beat once and would dearly have loved to beat again. We have to decide, Mr. Biden said, without mentioning his now former opponent by name. Do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemy, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe you know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people. But he now faces a different challenge. No longer will he be measuring himself by the daily polls or the quarterly fundraising totals. Now he is moving to the stage that all presidents eventually get to, where he will be judging himself against the 44 other men who once held the job. History was clearly on his mind Wednesday night as he invoked George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. He quoted Benjamin Franklin and pointed to the bust he keeps in the Oval Office of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Caesar. He has lived a lot of that history himself. He was born when Roosevelt was president. His life spans 1/3 the life of the country, and his time in public life covers about a quarter of American history. For so long, he has given the impression of one who never wanted it to end. There has always been another speech, always another election, but now the number of speeches ahead is finite, and his last election is in the past. As that long goodbye gets underway, Mr. Biden has at long last reached his own inflection point. I would like for you guys to give your thoughts in the comments as always so that we can have a great debate. I personally did watch the last farewell address last night on Wednesday night, and I personally felt that he was struggling. He was struggling, and I felt like he was struggling, and I don't know what else to say other than he was struggling. I don't know if he needed glasses or if he's just really not feeling well. And I think it's a little bit of all three things. Age, he's not feeling well. He hasn't really came up to say if he really does have Parkinson's or does he have something else, COVID, I'm not exactly sure. But he should be more transparent as he's trying to say Donald Trump is not being transparent. He needs to be transparent about his health. Although he's dropped out of the election, it still would be good for him and his family or someone, aid or anybody, to let the Americans know on his health stance. I do believe us Americans are owned the right or deserve the right to know what is going on with Joe Biden. Is it his health? Is it his age? But what happened with his cognitive issues? What is going on up here that is not clicking? He's having trouble reading. That's why I say if he needed glasses, but I think it's more so, again, his health. So you guys feel free to leave your comments down below, and we will see you guys on the next News Flash. Thank you and have a great day.